been a really tough week for law enforcement. Today, reports of a 9th suicide for this year in the NYPD. A California Highway Patrol officer gunned down. An ICE office apparently shot up, and a police captain on his way home from work, he was shot, but fortunately, we're told he did survive. So joining us tonight to talk about the latest in a recent spate of incidents targeting our law enforcement officers, former press secretary of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Rochelle Ritchie, and a former member of the NYPD Intelligence Division, Buck Sexton. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Good to see you, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
I want to read something from the Birmingham Real-Time News. This is the local police chief. They're talking about what they're facing. Under the headline, police are under increased attack. It says police officers are under increased attack because many of our laws have no real consequences, specifically when it comes to violent offenders. This, coupled with increased access to illegal guns, has been a deadly combination. I mean, Buck, these folks, like you have in the past, I mean, they suit up every day, they go to do their jobs, and we don't often have to think about it because they're getting the job done and they're protecting the rest of us. But it seems like many of them have got targets on their backs these days.
Well, Philadelphia is certainly a reminder of just how dangerous what can seem relatively routine, although a felony drug warrant is really never quite routine. But these are the risks that men and women in uniform take on a daily basis. And there have been a series of narratives that much of the news media have seized on in recent years and up to now that are clearly anti-law enforcement. I mean, just in this past week, you had Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, two people that are vying for the Democratic presidential nomination, say that Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson. We know that there was a federal investigation that was found to be not true, but that kind of rhetoric has consequences. When Ocasio-Cortez refers to concentration camps at the border, that de facto means that the ICE officers who are running those camps are part of what could be akin to a Nazi-like regime. This is just deeply unhelpful, and law enforcement, I think, does get very tired of being treated in this way and being disrespected when we have an incredible relationship in this country with police. We really do.
Yeah, and a number of police chiefs across Massachusetts got very upset about Senator Elizabeth Warren talking about Michael Brown, something that was, as you said, the federal investigation under the Obama Justice Department said it was not a murder, cleared that officer. The Washington Post, not a right-wing outlet, gave 4 Pinocchios, I think it was. I mean, their highest rating, that absolutely was not true. So a police chief there at Massachusetts authored a letter to her and said, your reckless tweet will only serve to create hatred towards police officers and place them in danger of more assaults and perhaps death. We expect our elected officials to condemn the murder and assaults of police officers. Instead, on multiple occasions, you chose to fan the fires of divide for your own political gains. Shame on you. I mean, Rochelle, what about this public conversation directing and talking about our officers out there in uniform as if they are the bad guys?
Well, I think that what happened in Philadelphia really highlights the dangers that police officers across the country face every day. I mean, when you think about it, these kind of warrants are carried out all of the time. And unfortunately, what we've seen happen in Philadelphia is that you've had 6 officers shot and three that were wounded. However, I think it's very irresponsible to try and make this appear as if you have Democrats calling for police officers to be shot or for any activists or people that march and protest of police brutality to suggest that they think that these officers should be shot. This was a routine, warrant that was being executed. This was not a guy that ran into a police precinct and tried to shoot police officers. This is a very different thing than what we've seen happen in places like El Paso, where you've had white supremacists go.
Okay, let's
and
stay
shoot.
Let's stay focused where we are. And I'll remind people, and our viewers have seen the people marching in the streets saying things like pigs in a blanket.
Well,
saying pigs in a blanket, and you've had other people marching down the streets in Charlottesville saying Jews should not replace us.
Okay,
let's talk about law enforcement. We need to actually talk about
we are talking about law enforcement and what they're facing right now. Buck.
Look, I covered the Black Lives Matter protests. I saw the placards about racist police murderers. I took video of it myself. I covered it. I wrote about it.
Name one Black Lives activist person that has murdered a police
No one has
officer.
made that claim. So you keep saying something that no one has said on this show or on this air.
I didn't make a claim. I asked you for a name.
I'm sorry, what are you asking me?
I asked you to name a Black Lives Matter activist that has killed a police officer.
There was a man who was
confirmed member.
inspired by Black Lives Matter rhetoric by his own admission who killed 6 officers in Dallas, Texas under the Obama administration.
That is not true. That is absolutely not true.
That is
that
absolutely
man
true.
Was a retired, he was an Army veteran, and he was not inspired by Black
There were
Lives
also
Matter. And
two
he actually
individuals,
said
there were
he
two
was
police
not
officers
inspired
Let's not talk at the
in
same
his
time.
life.
assassinated on the streets of New York City, my hometown, NYPD officers sitting in their car by someone who was inspired by the rhetoric of Black Lives Matter. So it actually does happen. If you're going to ask me about specifics, I can give them to you. We're just trying to talk about a narrative in this country right now where law enforcement are being called terrible things by prominent politicians. Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren lied about what happened in Ferguson because they're pandering to a left-wing base. And law enforcement gets sick of it.
Kamala Harris, a former attorney general
Lied.
and a
It's a
prosecutor, a law enforcement official
Still a
herself,
lie.
is putting targets on the back of police officers.
But again,
I didn't say that.
if she says, and she uses the words, and she is a very accomplished attorney and was the top law enforcement officer in California, if she uses the word murder, she knows it's not accurate, and that is potentially very combustible to a lot of people. If we're going to talk about rhetoric on the right, middle, and left, we have to agree that if we think it's going to impact people who are vulnerable to being, influenced by these things, we all have to take a look at what we're saying. And I think that's fair.
I think we do. And I think also to you, Buck and Shannon, I think we also have to talk about gun legislation, because this is very important to protect those officers.
Okay.
The mayor
I
came
agree.
out about an hour ago in Philadelphia, and he said that there needs to be some gun legislation to protect officers on the street.
And we are going to talk
people in our
underway.
community.
Yes, and those conversations are underway. We're going to talk about guns and that debate later in the show because, of course, it's another part of this conversation. Rochelle and Buck, thank you both very much on an important night. Thank you for being with us.